Ask any drag racing historian when the funny car era truly began, and they'll point you to 1966, the year Mercury rolled out those revolutionary loggy-chassised flip-top Comets and supposedly changed everything overnight. But here's what those historians won't tell you. The real story isn't about the cars that won, it's about the cars that refused to follow the script. See, between 1966 and 1968, there was this beautiful, chaotic window where nobody really knew what a funny car was supposed to be. Should it flip? Should the doors work? Steel body, fiberglass, tube chassis, or modified stock frame, Hemi, or big block Chevy? The answer, for about 2 glorious years, was yes, all of it, whatever you could dream up and somehow get down the quarter mile. These were the transitional funny cars, the misfits, the experiments, the steel-bodied holdouts that some fans called the last of the real cars, while others dismissed them as relics that just didn't get the memo. Today, we're going to look at 7 of these forgotten machines, plus a few honorable mentions, cars that ran in the 8s when the flip-tops were cracking into the 7s, cars that kept their doors and their dignity, cars that proved there was more than one way to go fast with a body on top. Some of you old-timers remember these. Some of you have never heard of them. Either way, buckle up, because this is the story they don't usually tell. The Bloom and Bullet 1967 Camaro. Late 1966, Jerry Bloom, a liquor store owner and weekend drag racer, is stranded somewhere in Southern California with a dead car. Along comes Mark Bullitt, also a racer, who pulls over to help. By the time they got Bloom's car running again, these two had hatched a plan to build a funny car together. They tapped Chuck Finders to construct the chassis, a square tube job running a stock 108-inch wheelbase to match the brand new 1967 Camaro that was just hitting showroom floors. And that's important. The 67 model year cars actually went on sale in late 1966, which gave these guys just enough head start to build what would become the first running 1967 funny car on the West Coast. The first one, built by a liquor store owner and his roadside buddy. Fiberglass trends made them a multi-piece body, nose section, firewall back, the works. The doors, they worked. This wasn't a flip-top. This was a car that still looked like, well, a car. But under that steel roof, things got wild. The engine setback was absolutely extreme for its day. The 396, bored out to 454 cubes with 11.5-to-1 compression, didn't sit in the engine bay. It sat completely inside what would have been the passenger compartment. The whole motor was encased in its own aluminum shield, with the driver sitting practically in the back seat. Doug's headers built them a custom exhaust setup that flowed down and out, terminating behind the doors. An Olds rear end with 3.90 gears. A C&M prepared torque flight, and when they lit the candles, Hill-borne injection drinking nitro. The chassis featured some clever engineering for its day. The front suspension used a narrowed forward axle with tube shocks mounted on a transverse leaf spring. Out back, a Ford 9-inch rear end sat on ladder bars with coilovers. The whole package was designed to be as low as possible while still maintaining ground clearance for the headers. Weight distribution was critical. With that engine shoved so far back, they had to be careful not to make the car too tail-heavy. The solution was strategic ballast placement and careful attention to where every component sat. January 1967, Lyons drag strip. The car makes its debut on straight methanol while they sort out the bucks. Deep 9s. Not bad, but not headline-grabbing either. Then they switched to nitro. The transformation was immediate. The Bloom and Bullet Camaro started clicking off runs in the mid-8s at about 170 miles per hour. Suddenly, that roadside partnership was running with the big dogs. The car earned a reputation for consistency. It made the same run over and over, which is exactly what match race promoters wanted to see. The paint scheme was simple but effective, a clean base with minimal graphics, letting the car's lines speak for themselves. In an era of psychedelic paint jobs and wild graphics, sometimes simple worked better. Oh, and the name, Bloom and Bullet, combining both their surnames? That wasn't some Madison Avenue marketing genius. That was Mark Bullitt's mom's idea.
The car eventually sold to Gene Conway at C&M Transmissions, who threw a Firebird nose on it and kept racing through 1968. The chassis saw several more iterations before finally disappearing into the collector car shuffle of the 1970s.
Car 2, the Chicago Speed Shop Special, Mr. Norm's 1966 Dodge Charger. If you grew up anywhere near Chicago in the 1960s and had even a passing interest in going fast, you knew one name: Grand Spalding Dodge. The dealership's 1965 blown Hemi Cornet had been a monster, an 8-second hit that fans loved from coast to coast. But 1965 ended, and Mr. Norm needed to sell 1966 Dodges. The solution was obvious: build a 66 Charger funny car. And when the world finally saw it in fall of 1966, jaws dropped. This wasn't just a drag car, this was art. The chassis ran a 128-inch wheelbase with 48 inches of engine setback, square tube frame rails with a tubular superstructure, all designed to be low. This thing hunkered down like a predator waiting to strike. The fiberglass body weighed just 220 pounds and actually looked like a factory Charger. They pulled the molds directly off a car sitting on Mr. Norm's sales lot. The construction was all business. R&B Chassis in Kenosha, Wisconsin handled the frame fabrication. The body was done with multiple pieces for easier repair after the inevitable crashes. Everything bolted together with aircraft-grade hardware. At 1,850 pounds, this Charger was a featherweight. The blown 426 Hemi ran a relatively conservative 35% nitro load with 10-to-1 compression and a blower overdriven 25%. Here's where the innovation really showed. The car used trailer leaf springs, yes, trailer springs, in both front and rear. The reasoning was simple. Trailer springs were designed to handle massive loads and provide progressive rate characteristics. Apply that thinking to a drag car, and you get excellent weight transfer characteristics. It had a movable engine mount system, allowing up to 9 inches of adjustment to tune weight transfer. Different tracks required different setups, and this car could adapt to virtually any surface condition. The transmission was a bulletproof torque flight built specifically for the abuse of nitro racing. The rear end was a narrowed Chrysler 8 3/4, chosen for its strength and proven performance in fuel racing applications. And despite looking like an honest-to-God showroom Charger, it was running with anybody in the country. By the time the car was fully sorted, high sevens at over 180 miles per hour on a steel-roofed funny car with working doors in 1967. Those numbers put it right in the hunt with the factory-backed flip-tops that were supposed to be the future of the sport. The car stayed in service until 1968, when a redesigned Charger body took over. But the original 66 proved that Grand Spalding Dodge could build more than just street muscle. Car 3. The Gasser Guys Go Funny. Stone, Woods & Cook's Dark Horse 2 1966 Mustang. Some names in drag racing need no introduction. Stone, Woods & Cook's. If you know anything about the Gasser Wars, you know these three guys and their baby blue Willies absolutely owned the A-gas scene through the early 60s. Magazine covers, model kits, the Swindler and Swindler A weren't just race cars, they were cultural icons. So when the Gasser party started winding down and the funny car money started calling, what did they do? They built a Mustang with steel quarters and a steel roof, because Stone, Woods & Cook's were traditionalists, and if they were going to run a funny car, it was going to have doors. The Dark Horse 2 started life as a stripper 1966 Mustang, bought straight off a Southern California dealer lot. Pat Foster and Ron Screama at Exhibition Engineering gutted everything, leaving only the steel roof and quarter panels. They built a 118-inch wheelbase tube frame underneath, using all-round tubing, basically a 6-point roll cage welded to a 2-rail chassis. Front axle came from a narrowed 57 Oldsmobile, a proven piece in gasser racing that translated well to the funny car application.
The rear featured adjustable coilovers and disc brakes, fancy stuff for 1967, when most cars were still running drum brakes. A Simpson parachute handled the stopping program at the top end. The engine was a 454 cubic inch version of a 392 Hemi, Chrysler's aging warhorse, bored out to serious displacement. The 392 architecture dated back to the 1950s, but it could still make serious power when properly prepared. Joe Mandela worked his magic on the cylinder heads for nitro abuse. BM built the TorqueFlite, beefed up to handle the abuse that nitro would dish out. The fuel system was Hilburn injection, the gold standard for nitro applications. Blower drive was handled by a Gilmer belt setup, more reliable than the older chain drive systems that tended to fail at inconvenient moments. The interior? Tom Hanna did it. Absolutely gorgeous stuff. Tuck and roll, perfectly finished, spotlessly clean. That was the Stone, Woods, and Cook's way. If it wasn't polished, it wasn't ready. These guys had been building show-quality cars for years, and they weren't going to change just because they were going drag racing. Testing started on straight alcohol. The car clicked off an 8.63 at 170 miles per hour on its very first day, respectable numbers that immediately improved once they switched to fuel. Low 8s at over 180 miles per hour. Bookings rolled in. The Dark Horse 2 was a gold mine. But then came Alton, Illinois. A 180-mile-an-hour crash ended the driving career of one of the team members. But they did what drag racers do, built another nearly identical car, hired different drivers, and kept touring until 1969. The Dark Horse 2 was a transitional car in a transitional time, but for one season, it proved the Gasser Kings could hang with anybody in any body style.
The Oldsmobile that should not have worked, a Chevy 2 that became a legend, and the car that invented the half-track burnout. But first, let me tell you about the Minnesota boys who proved Tony Nancy wasn't the only one crazy enough to run Olds power in the funny car ranks. Car number 4, the rocket that flew. Lutz and Lundberg's 442 Much 1966 Oldsmobile 442. Jim Lutz and Myron Lundberg were nuts. That's not an insult, that's their resume. These two Minnesota boys had been terrorizing AA Altered class for years with their Anglia, a wheel-standing, left-front-lifting maniac of a car. They'd won the 1965 UDRA Points Championship with it. So when the Anglia got wrecked in a crash at Cedar Falls Raceway, everyone expected them to rebuild it. Wrong. They looked at the funny car scene and saw opportunity. But they weren't going to follow the Mercury template. They weren't going to run a Hemi or a big block Chevy. They were going to stuff an Oldsmobile engine into an Oldsmobile body and see what happened. Tony Nancy had been running Olds power in his dragsters with success, and that was enough inspiration. The boys marched into Holiday Oldsmobile, a dealership famous for selling more 442s than anybody in America, and walked out with a sponsorship, a brand new Toronado tow vehicle, and basically a blank check for parts. But here's where it gets weird. They kept the stock frame. Bill Jeffrey at Northeast Auto Body did the body mods, moving the front wheel openings 7 inches forward, the rears over a foot forward, creating a shortened 105-inch wheelbase that made the 442 look like someone had squeezed it in a compactor. They added a roll cage tied into those stock frame rails and called it good. The decision to keep the stock frame was controversial. Conventional wisdom said you needed a purpose-built tube chassis to handle nitro power. The Minnesota boys disagreed. They figured the stock frame was designed to handle the stresses of regular driving. Why couldn't it handle racing if properly reinforced? They were partly right. The frame held up, but it flexed more than a tube chassis would. This actually helped the car hook up on certain surfaces, but it made handling unpredictable at high speeds. The engine? Jack Wheeler built them a 400 cubic inch Olds bored an astonishing .375 over, then stroked to 500 cubes. The Oldsmobile engine architecture wasn't common in drag racing. Most people ran Hemis or big block Chevys, but it had some advantages.
The cylinder head design flowed well, and the bottom end could be made strong enough for nitro use. A 671 blower sat on top, driven at moderate overdrive. They ran it on low-percentage nitro, not because they were conservative, but because they were smart. You can't make money match racing if your engine scatters every third weekend. The economics of racing dictated reliability as much as speed. That same engine lasted 2 full seasons. Same block, same rotating assembly, same crank, rods, and pistons. In an era when guys were killing engines every few runs, the Lutz and Lundbergs just kept clicking off 8s. 8.60s at 170 miles per hour. Not world-beating, but consistent, competitive, and absolutely unique. There was nothing else like this car on the circuit. Then, halfway through 1966, disaster struck. A towing accident destroyed the 98 hauler, the trailer, and the driver's side of the funny car. Looking at the photos, it's a miracle anybody walked away. But they rebuilt, they repainted, trading the original Cadillac Cimarron Frost for a stunning black base coat with gold stripes, and they went right back to work. Here's the kicker. They painted the weight on the side of the car. 2,660 pounds. This thing was about 1,000 pounds heavier than the Mercurys and Chrysler products it competed against. It was an absolute tank, and it still won. 8 national records, back-to-back Division V Super Eliminator titles in 1966 and 1967, tours through Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Tennessee, Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, Nebraska, and Canada. The end came at the 1967 Indy Nationals. The car tried to fly on a qualifying pass at 175 miles per hour. The driver wrestled it back down and crossed the finish line sideways. Actually qualified with that run, but the for sale sign went on the car before they left the track. Nobody was using spoilers on funny cars yet. The car got sold and faded into history. But a few years back, some enthusiasts found it in an Indiana barn and started a restoration to 1966 specs. Sometimes the wild ones come home. Car number 5, the Candy Apple Chevy. Pisano Brothers 1967 Camaro. If you followed drag racing, or Bonneville, or hot rodding in general during the 1960s, you knew the Pisano name. Joe Pisano was Venolia Pistons. He was one of the architects of the JP1 aluminum engine block that would revolutionize fuel racing in the 1980s. And in 1967, he and his brother Frankie built one of the most technically advanced funny cars of the Transitional era. Joe bought a 6-cylinder Camaro from Warren Big Chevy and drove it straight to the shop of Doug Cruz, a fabrication genius who remains criminally underappreciated in drag racing history. Cruz wasn't just a welder, he was an engineer. He had the entire chassis drawn out on a massive drafting board before he cut a single tube. Every dimension calculated, every angle planned. Using the car's steel doors, roof, and quarter panels, combined with fiberglass nose and deck lid from Fiberglass Trends, Cruz built something that looked like a primitive ancestor of a modern Pro Stock chassis. Round tubing throughout, 1 inch and 5/8 inch for structural elements, 7/8 inch for supports, 1 inch for bracing, all 4330 chromoly. The engine sat 27 3/4 inches behind the front spindles, 14.5 inches off the ground measured from crank center line, tilted rearward 2.5 degrees, and laid to the right 1 1/4 degrees to help load the right tire and offset driver weight. But the real innovation was in the back. Cruz designed a torsion bar rear suspension, 2 3-foot-long bars of 4340 steel running laterally across the chassis, with adjustable arms offering 14 different positions. You could change preload, suspension travel, ride height, side-to-side tire loading, spring rate, weight bias, and both the rate and amount of lift at either end. This was without question the most tunable chassis in funny car racing in 1967, maybe in any racing, period. Nick Arias tuned the blown 427 Chevy, 10.7 to 1 compression, Venolia pistons, Mandello ported heads with bigger valves, Don Hampton 671 blower making 18 pounds of boost, Hillborn injection, turbo 400 trans. On only 30% nitro, the car clicked off 8.50s at 174 miles per hour, right out of the box. But by 1966, the writing was on the wall. The steel-bodied cars, even ones this sophisticated, were getting outclassed by the lighter, more aerodynamic flip-tops. The candy apple Camaro disappeared into history. But that torsion bar suspension concept, that spirit of engineering-first innovation, that's the Pisano legacy.
Still with me? Good, because we've still got the car that invented the half-track burnout and the steel-bodied Chevy too that started a legend. But first, let's talk about what happens when three guys from a Chicago garage decide to change the sport forever. Car number 6, the Burnout Kings. Chi-Town Hustler, 1967 Barracuda. There's a moment in every sport where somebody does something so wild, so unprecedented, that everyone else has to respond. In funny car racing, that moment came from a car built in a 2-car garage behind somebody's mother's house in Chicago. John Farconis was an engineer at Union Carbide. Pat Minnick was a wheelman. Austin Coyle was a young mechanic struggling to fund his own superstocker. They all got clutch work done at the same shop, E&R Automotive on Chicago's North Side. Somewhere between clutch conversations and parts counter chat, they decided to build a funny car. Winter 1966-67, that little garage, working nights and weekends. Farconis designed the tube chassis, tested it with toothpick models to find the weak points. Coyle welded it together. Minnick made sure the cockpit would let him actually drive the thing and started calling promoters to book dates. The 1967 Barracuda that rolled out of that garage wasn't just functional, it was fast. The chassis was innovative in its simplicity, round tubing throughout, with a roll cage that doubled as the main structural element. The body was fiberglass. They'd made the jump to flip-top configuration, but the car's approach to racing was distinctly old school. The engine was a 426 HME, built for reliability as much as power. The team couldn't afford to scatter motors at every other race, so they developed tuning parameters that maximized performance while minimizing parts breakage. This philosophy would later influence some of the most successful funny car programs in history. Their first real test? The Funny Car Nationals in York, Pennsylvania, April 1967. Pretty much every big name in fuel coupe racing was there. Nicholson, the Ram Chargers, Arnie Bestwick, Gary Dyer. Chi-Town Hustler set a track record of 8.19 right off the trailer, then ran 8.17 for low ET of the event. Don Nicholson walked over to their pit and asked, "Who the hell are you guys?" That's where it started, but here's where the legend really took off. See, the theory was, if you smoked the tires really hard in high gear and got them hot, maybe it would help traction. The team had noticed that after extended burnouts, the car hooked up harder off the line. So the burnouts started getting longer and longer, then longer still. The science behind it wasn't fully understood at the time. Today we know that heating the tire compound activates certain chemicals in the rubber that improve grip. Back then, they just knew it worked. By mid-1969, when they'd upgraded to their famous Charger-bodied car, those burnouts went past the finish line, half-track tire smokers that left the fans absolutely losing their minds. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. Track promoters started demanding it. "We want the Chi-Town car with the burnouts." It became their signature, their calling card, their brand. The Chi-Town Hustler ran the same Hemi engine for all of 1967 and 1968 without a rebuild. Same block, same rotating assembly. When everybody else was blowing up motors and breaking parts, Coyle had figured out calibration parameters that let them make big power without big carnage. This approach would later become the foundation of Coyle's legendary tuning career. Mid-sevens, consistent, reliable, booked at over 100 match races per year at their peak. The car eventually led to back-to-back NHRA championships in 1982 and 1983 with Frank Howley behind the wheel, and Austin Coyle went on to become the most successful funny car crew chief in history, tuning for John Force. All because three guys with complementary skills found each other at a clutch shop and decided to see what they could build in somebody's mom's garage.
Car 7, the Chevy Faithful. 1966-1967 Chevy 2 Jungle Jim Lieberman. Let me tell you about a car that stuck with Chevrolet when Chevrolet wouldn't even acknowledge it existed. The 1966 steel-bodied Chevy 2 was the first car to wear the Jungle Jim name on the door. It was built on a tubular chassis with the stock body panels retained, roof, quarters, doors. The engine was a supercharged big block Chevy running on nitromethane in an era when most independents were still figuring out how to make fuel cars reliable. The car wasn't pretty in the conventional sense. It was functional. Every piece was there for a reason, and nothing was wasted. The paint was simple, the graphics minimal, but the personality came through in how it ran. The 1967 Tour made it a household name, but not because it was the fastest thing out there. It wasn't. The factory-backed Mercury and Chrysler cars were cracking 7s, while this car was still running 8s. The deficit was about half a second, an eternity in drag racing. But it made its name being interesting. Wheel stands, smoky burnouts, 100-mile-per-hour backwards drives after the burnout, and an absolute flat-out refusal to lift, even when the car was completely out of shape and any sane person would have bailed. The chassis was set up specifically for this kind of driving. Weight distribution was biased toward the rear, which made the car prone to wheel stands under hard acceleration. Most teams would have adjusted this out. This one leaned into it. Against Don Nicholson in a 2-race match, this Chevy 2 carried the front wheels for the entire length of the track. Twice. Didn't win. Didn't care. The fans went absolutely berserk. See, this car understood something that a lot of factory-backed machines never figured out. Fans don't necessarily pay to see the fastest car. They pay to see a show. And nobody put on a show like the Jungle Jim Chevy 2. The engine program evolved throughout the car's life. It started with a blown 427 Chevy running Hillborn injection and a Potvin blower. Compression was relatively high, around 11-to-1, which limited the nitro percentage but made the car incredibly responsive. By 1968, the operation was running a 2-car team with multiple drivers, proving the concept could be scaled. The original Chevy 2 served as the template for what came next. Through every body style change, every chassis upgrade, every evolution from steel Chevy 2 to flip-top Nova to Vega, the operation stayed Chevy. Even when it finally had to switch to Hemi power to stay competitive in the late 60s, Chevy bodies stayed on the cars. General Motors had officially abandoned racing support in the mid-60s. This car didn't care. It became Mr. Chevrolet by sheer force of will and tire smoke. NHRA eventually ranked the driver number 17 on their list of the top 50 drivers ever. In 2019, fans voted him the #1 funny car driver of the category's first 50 years. Not bad for a car that ran 8s while everyone else ran 7s.
Honorable mentions. The other transitional greats. We covered 7 cars in detail, but the transitional era produced others that deserve at least a mention. Doug Thorley's Covair, 1967. An independent header manufacturer from Southern California took the oddball Covair body, the same car Ralph Nader had called unsafe at any speed, and made it a winner. The car was built on a loggy chassis with a fiberglass body, powered by a big block Chevy with a 671 blower. Thorley loaded up the Covair and headed to Indianapolis for the 1967 U.S. Nationals, the first time Funny Car Eliminator would be contested at the sport's biggest event. Qualifying was tough. Jack Chrisman's GT Comet had blistered an unbelievable 7.60 on special M&H tires that nobody else had access to. Then Thorley got himself some of those same M&H slicks. The car ran 7.81, then 7.69, beating Bill Lawton's factory-backed Tasca Ford Mustang and Maynard Rupp's Mercury Cougar, 2 genuine factory teams on consecutive runs. In the final, Thorley posted a 7.83 to defeat Joe Lunati's Dixie Devil Camaro. An independent header manufacturer had just won the first ever NHRA Funny Car Eliminator title at Indianapolis. The car eventually sold to Joe Pisano after the season, proving that even the winners could become someone else's foundation. Harry Schmidt and Mike Burkhart's 1968 Camaro. Before the Blue Max became one of the most famous names in drag racing, there was this, a sectioned, chopped, steel-roofed Camaro built by Don Hardy in Floyd, Texas. Don Pellegrini at Fiberglass Limited took the body and sectioned it 12 inches for better aerodynamics and lower center of gravity. The thing was slammed. The chassis was built by A.W. Tackett's welding shop outside Dallas, a square-tube ladder frame with a chrome moly superstructure and NASCAR-style roll cage. A 120-inch wheelbase, stock-style coil-spring rear suspension with coilovers up front. Started with an injected nitro big block running 830s at around 170 miles per hour. For 1968, they added a blower and picked up Duran Chevrolet as a sponsor. Times dropped into the 7.60s at 180 miles per hour. The car claimed an 86% win rate on the match race circuit. After the partnership ended, Schmidt went to the Ram Chargers, got himself a proper 426 Hemi, had Don Hardy build him a 1969 Mustang chassis, and named the whole operation after his favorite World War I movie. The Blue Max won 3 consecutive NHRA championships under Raymond Badel. Dick Harrell's 1967 Camaro. Mr. Chevrolet himself was putting 427s in Camaros before the ink was dry on GM's drawings. His steel-bodied tube-frame Camaro wore the Yenko shield on its flanks and proved you could run competitive numbers without going flip-top. Square tube frame, metal body with fiberglass doors and front clip, a hybrid approach that split the difference between old school and new. The car was built for the match race circuit, where appearance money and guaranteed purses made it possible to earn a living without factory support. Harrell's operation focused on building street performance Chevrolets during the week and racing on weekends. The funny car was as much a promotional tool as a race car, showing what the Harrell Performance Center could do for customers who wanted that kind of power in their street machines.
By 1969, the steel-bodied funny car was effectively dead. Not because they stopped running fast. The Pisano Camaro was competitive. The Chi-Town Hustler proved tube chassis Hemis could dominate. Mr. Norm's operation kept evolving with new body styles and improved performance. They died because the flip-tops were easier. Easier to work on. Pop the body, there's the whole chassis laid bare. You could change an engine in an hour instead of half a day. Easier to make light. No steel to carry meant more power-to-weight ratio. A fiberglass body weighing 150 pounds versus a steel structure at 400 or more. That difference showed up on the time slips. And easier to crash and survive. This mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. Fiberglass shatters instead of crumpling around you. When a steel-bodied car got sideways at 180 miles an hour and hit the wall, the results were often catastrophic. The flip-tops could absorb impacts in ways the steel cars couldn't. The Mercury Comet template became the template. Loggy became the gold standard. By 1970, if you showed up to a major event with a steel-roofed funny car, you might as well have been driving a covered wagon. The transition happened faster than anyone expected. Cars that were competitive in 1967 were curiosities by 1969 and museum pieces by 1971. The pace of development accelerated so quickly that entire philosophies of construction became obsolete almost overnight. But here's what gets lost in that evolution. The transitional funny cars proved there was no single way to go fast. Steel bodies, stock frames, Olds power, torsion bar suspensions, trailer springs, working doors, 14-position adjustable rear ends. Every crazy idea somebody could dream up, somebody tried. Some worked brilliantly.
The Pisano suspension concept influenced chassis design for decades. The Chi-Town burnout technique became standard operating procedure. The Mr. Norm approach to weight transfer still makes sense today. Some didn't work at all. Stock frames proved too flexible for the power levels involved. Certain engine combinations just couldn't make enough power to compete. Some chassis designs that looked good on paper fell apart under the stress of actual racing. But the trying, that spirit of what if we did it this way, that's what made drag racing special in those years. The guys who built these cars weren't following a playbook. There was no playbook. They were writing it as they went, learning from every failure, stealing every good idea they saw, and racing anybody willing to line up next to them. Two strangers meeting on the side of the road and deciding to build a race car together. A Hemi manufacturer taking on the factory teams and winning at Indy. Minnesota boys defying physics with an Oldsmobile that weighed 1,000 pounds more than the competition. An engineer building chassis prototypes out of toothpicks in his mother's garage. These weren't corporate operations with engineering departments and test facilities. These were guys with skills, guts, and garage space, betting everything on the chance to go fast. The flip-tops were better. I won't argue that. Evolution works because better ideas survive. But sometimes it's worth remembering the branches of the family tree that got pruned, the experiments that didn't quite make it, the steel-bodied misfits that ran in the 8s while the future ran in the 7s. They proved that drag racing was still a sport where a regular guy with a good idea and enough determination could compete against anybody. That democratic spirit, the idea that fast was fast regardless of who built it, that's what made the early funny car years magical. Today's funny cars cost millions of dollars. They require engineering degrees and computer modeling and wind tunnel testing. They're faster than anything those old-timers could have imagined, but they're no longer something a guy could build in his mom's garage. The transitional era was the last time that was possible. The last time a liquor store owner and his roadside buddy could build a car that competed with factory-backed equipment. The last time 3 guys from a clutch shop could change the sport forever. They were there. They mattered. And for 2 chaotic, beautiful years, they were funny cars, too. If you remember seeing any of these cars in person, at Lions, at Indy, at your local strip on a Sunday afternoon, drop a comment below. Tell us what it was like. Tell us what we got wrong. Tell us about the cars we missed. Because this era, it's fading. The guys who built these machines are mostly gone now. The guys who watched them run are getting there. But as long as somebody keeps telling the stories, they're not completely forgotten. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you want more forgotten drag racing history, and I'll see you next time.